everybody. I just want to make sure I don't fall off the stage because the lights are very bright here. It's so good to see you. It's a pleasure to be back here as a speaker, but of course, as you know, I love doing the experiencer sessions. And I had no idea that Alejandra was going to present all these anniversaries because last month I celebrated 25 years in this field. Unbelievable. Thank you. Now, my talk today is quite a departure from what I normally speak about. I normally present cases for you. But I've been receiving messages and information lately that I feel you all need to know. So today, I am stepping out of my comfort zone. And I hope you excuse me for using my notes, but this is a brand new lecture just for you and just for this conference. Some of the information that I have been receiving has to do with environmental, the condition of our planet, as well as today's political climate. And no matter where you are politically, I want everyone to know the information. I feel that strongly about it, and that's why I'm here presenting. I can only go where the research takes me, and this is what I have done for the last 25 years in my work. And I will not be surprised if some of you sitting out here today have received similar messages. Okay, since about 2011, I have been seeing patterns emerge from people contacting me about messages or hard to explain feelings. This pattern has become stronger and stronger for the last 4 or 5 years, and within this last year, say 2016 to now, we're in February, they become even more intense over time. And actually, the early pattern manifested itself here at this very conference while I was hosting the experiencer sessions. And I first spoke about this publicly when I was interviewed for LA Weekly magazine, when the reporter asked me if there was anything new on the horizon working with experiencers. And I told her, yes. I said, I'm discussing this new trend of people urgently trying to figure out something that they are supposed to do. They were conveying something that I had never heard before with such insistence. Since that time, a number of clients who had these feelings grew, as well as the intensity of the feelings. Not only new clients, but people who have been in my support group 0, which is now 24 years old, have discussed this within the group meetings. Each of these people feel urgency to do something. This exact phrase is commonly used by them to explain their inner feelings. Age, length of experiences, gender, political leanings, and other factors do not make a difference. Most of them feel they have an important task to perform very soon. Most do not know what task they are supposed to perform. Even without conscious knowledge to explain their feelings, most know they must act, and that time is running out. But time for what? I had the honor of being invited to the Abduction Study Conference in June of 1992, and this was co-hosted by Dr. John Mack and physicist David Pritchard, who was a professor there at MIT. One of the highlights for me at this conference was seeing for the first time an experiencer panel. And I felt these brave souls were sitting there, and really poured out their feelings to all of us who are all researchers about what has happened to them. Susan, one of the speakers, who I remember very well, took action based on the messages she was given that sound very similar to those of today. She was shown on a viewing screen scenes of land being planted and scenes of land that was barren of any plant life but was once covered in forest. She was told that a massacre had occurred, which she understood it to be an ecological massacre. She says, "I remember feeling that time was running out and something needed to be done." She used the phrase "need to do something," and this was back in 1992, to characterize her feelings. She stated she did not remember being given any specific information, but was more of a feeling that she should act. And, excuse me. Now, Susan's parallels with today. Susan was called to action through her experiences. Even though Susan's experiences were often frightening, and we discussed this in the experiencer session this morning, she talks about the many changes that have occurred in her life, one of which caused her to take steps to preserve the environment. She used the phrase "need to do something" to characterize her feelings. She stated she does not remember being given any specific information, but it was more of a feeling that she should act. Okay. And I'll talk about, and we mentioned Jim Sparks this morning as well. Now, Susan's need to do something back then in 1992 finds a parallel with many of today's experiencers. With the need to act was a common feeling among experiencers. The frequency and urgency felt by recent experiencers is striking. The feeling of urgency was not present in 1992 like it is today. They tell me about their concern for the environment, but I feel the urgency has extended beyond environmental concerns. This past November's election results prompted much concern among experiencers, but yet I was told that the urgency was accelerating prior to the tumultuous election. Now, we mentioned Jim Sparks this morning. We mentioned about the fear he had when he first started his experiences. But in his book, The Keepers, an Alien Message for the Human Race, he was one of Dr. Mack's patients. Jim Sparks could consciously recall his ET interactions without any memory blocks. He was told, "Your planet is dying," and to correct the environmental condition of our planet. He quotes, "Our dear blue and white jewel of a planet is dying because of our own mismanagement. While our problems are clear enough, the solutions are not." Okay, since 2011, urgency feelings accelerate. Most of my clients come forward with a similar urgency. The urgency to act is also found in every experiencer group I meet. According to experiencer groups at the UFO Congress, and here we are, 70 to 80% of experiencers feel a need to do something. If there are 100 people in the room, almost all will raise their hands when I ask about an underlying urgency to act. No other question gets a similar response. Most feel that time is running out. They must act, however, they are not sure how and what to do. Over the 25 years of working with experiencers through regression sessions and support groups, they have stated over and over again that the alien beings are telling them they are being trained, and when the time comes, they will know what to do. Experiencers have told me they often have vivid dreams of leading large groups of people. But leading them where? They do not know. And for what purpose? They do not know. I sent out an email to serial members, and we have probably a couple of hundred right now on the list, many more through the years. And I received several emails back when I asked the question about how are you feeling about this urgency now? Now, Linda Cortilli, you remember her as Linda in Bud Hopkins' book, Witness, the True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abductions. She's a part of CERO, and she writes to me, it almost feels like when sitting in the reception room at the doctor's office and waiting for your name to be called, as it seems with each passing year, the feeling of urgency gets stronger. At this point, I'm at my wit's end. Whatever it is that has made me feel this way seems a lot closer than it has ever been. I believe that the new year, she's talking about 2017, will be the year that we'll find out. Quite honestly, I don't know why it worries me, because whatever is going to happen is something I'm not sure of. I can't get a feeling if it's good or bad. And then about a week later, she wrote again. She tells me, the feeling of urgency that I have felt and still feel even stronger now is a feeling of future anticipation. It's funny that you've asked, because I've been thinking about it a lot. I haven't been sure if it's good or bad, but I'm now leaning towards dread. I've been buying water and freeze-dried food. I don't know if this feeling has anything to do with the environment or our planet. However, there are three things I've unwillingly been concentrating on. It's almost as though I'm being forced to concentrate on them. I'm not certain of which one it is. And she writes down number one, an attack of some kind, chemical, biological, or nuclear. And then she writes number two, a weather catastrophe, earthquake or hurricane. Or number three, UFO disclosure in an unusual way, in which may cause panic and rioting, but I'm not sure if the disclosure will be authentic. And I've heard this from other experiencers. Yvonne, she says, I'm swinging towards number three. Now I've had, and believe me, I don't want to present any of this as being negative or scare tactic. I'm just, as I mentioned before, sharing with you where my research has been taking me for the last 4 or 5 years with experiencers. They have been shown on screens, as I've mentioned in all my other lectures, pictures of devastation, bombs exploding, in the nuclear bomb and so forth. Okay, and we have married couple in CERO, and they write, my husband and I both have had nightmares and visions. We both wake up and talk about seeing and certainly feel coming, and they state, a nuclear attack, a weather catastrophe, earthquake. We have already bought several items from Costco, storing up on food, water, and a generator. This is very interesting that others are feeling, sensing, or seeing the same thing. Okay, and then this piece of artwork was done several years ago by my artist, Steve Neal, because I had several of my clients back then, and starting in the 90s, talk about being shown on screens or visions that something was happening, or something may happen, or something that may happen that we could probably stop. Okay, and we have another married couple. We can't seem to stop talking about it lately. It's almost an all-consuming topic that eventually makes its way into every conversation we have with each other. Before reuniting 3 years ago, we both separately felt something was going to happen in the future. But since reuniting, and especially the last year, it's so strong that we find it to be perpetual and invasive. We have also had a sudden increase in encounter activity the last few weeks. And this is Debbie Archer. She's been a longtime Cyril member since Cyril started. And she states, as for my feelings of impending something that causes a feeling of urgency to prepare, I've experienced it on and off most of my life up until recently. It would be like a breeze blew by. I notice it, wonder what it was all about, and then it would be gone. The last few years, they would last a little longer, so I would purchase some extra water when they would happen. But about May of this year, and she's talking about last year, 2016, I noticed it was stronger and continuous. It continued to intensify to the point I had to do something to prepare for it, whatever it is. In September of last year, I purchased a pressure canner and learned how to use it. It seems somehow to have a connection in the election, or to the elections this time. That's a whole other thing. And then she writes again, I'll give you an example of what I mean. Our country is divided right now. Setting aside the racial aspect, the division, what I am referring to, is between the Democrats and Republicans. Most specifically, the demonstrators and protesters. I would say most of these people, the demonstrators, are decent people who have their views and preferences and want to make them known. They are acting out of their anger and disappointment by demonstrating. Then there are protesters who didn't vote either way, are bussed in and paid to protest, make plans to and are instigate and commit the violence we are seen and are proud and arrogant about it. These are the ones who are in allegiance with the evil source, albeit indirectly. They are being paid by an individual closer to the evil source. And of course, I asked her what she meant by the evil source. As for the evil source being within our government, not directly, since there isn't really an individual one could point to and say that's it or that's him or her. However, there are those that are in allegiance based on purpose, some semi-knowingly and some unknowingly. This is where the contagion of emotion comes into play. The individuals who are in allegiance unknowingly really put up a front of doing good, but behind the scenes are committing crimes and are participating in unscrupulous behaviors. They are the narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. And very strong words, but this is what Debbie has been receiving among other people as well. So this is why I mentioned that it may have to do with the tumultuous elections that we all just experienced. Mary Palomar, who is the subject of my first book, Chosen, I have always felt on edge about something, but I can't put my finger on and have no idea what I'm supposed to do about it, and feeling like if whatever it is comes to pass, I will know what to do. Like so many of us, I am quite apprehensive about changes our species is making to the global environment that supports our existence and that of all the other species here on Earth with us, including the critters. Now, she always calls the alien beings critters, who told me they were naturalized citizens of Earth and presumably dependent on our planet to one extent or another. One odd thing has been going on for maybe 2 or 3 years now and accelerating over the course of the last year. I will be doing something ordinary, driving to work or doing something on a work-related project, and I hear things interjected in my internal chatter, such as the United States has just ended. The American project is over. Where can we move the project now? It's coming with more and more frequency and urgency, maybe a couple times in an hour. Another member, I just want to give you these examples of these messages that I've been hearing. Since what I call my awakening, I have felt this drive to find out what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I have never felt that I belong on the planet. I know this sounds strange, but I just don't feel like I am supposed to be here. I am not close to my family and feel drawn toward the stars. I have also been doing more and more research on the UFO alien connections. I was searching through the internet one day and found the UFO Congress. This was back in 2016. It was a last-minute thing. I brought my brother-in-law, who has also had contact, and we spent the next 4 days glued to our seats. I then attended one of your experiencer sessions, and I felt this is like home to me. The people were searching for the same answers. What is going on with us, and why are we drawn to many of the same things? As soon as I got home, I emailed you and set up an appointment. Jump down the rabbit hole, as they would say. I've never felt fear about what is happening to me. Believe it is still happening due to memories I have, and feel they are here to teach us something, like how to save our world. I feel it is too late for our planet, and I think they are giving us the tools we are going to need when the shit hits the fan. I feel that they will make their presence known soon enough. Humans are going to destroy this world and feel they know it. Okay, and this is from Jason Friend, who sent me one of his earliest memories. Before long, a third being came forward. Now, he was describing when he was younger, being on the craft. This is a conscious memory that he had, being on the table. This being was more like 6 feet tall compared to the other two, who stood more like 4 feet tall. The appearance of the taller being was distinctly different, a more elegant and more consciously engaging experience. I could feel her emotion. She walked forward slowly, engaging my mind and my soul in a way I could never forget. I was shown a screen. Oddly enough, the screen itself was quite similar to the flat screens we have today. On it, there were all manner of scenes of environmental destruction and human misery. Terrible pollution, dead and dying, ecosystems, oil disasters, nuclear disasters, war, mass death, bombs, airplanes, famine, drought, unbelievable conditions. And he's seeing this all as a young boy. I recall seeing the deforestation on the continents. I recall seeing something very closely resembling the oil fires seen during the first U.S. invasion of Iraq nearly a decade in the future. Essentially, they were there to plant a seed of awareness and urgency about a slew of dire conditions that needed correcting, and still do. It seemed I was given a download of to last a lifetime. And many experiencers feel that they have what we call downloaded with information. And here's another of my the artwork that Steve did for me over the years, because the experiencers were shown pictures of devastation, as Jason described, on flat screens, taken into a different room after their examination was done. And here's another serial member who you'll hear from. He is going to come up and speak to you the last 15 minutes of my time here, because again, I feel this is important information for everyone to know. But he wrote to me and he said, I have always felt an urgency, thinking I am here to do something. And this is what brought him, this feeling of urgency brought him to 0. And I am not doing it fast enough. Grant Cameron, a dear friend and colleague, and most of you know, of course, who he is. Grant Cameron calls it the Super Bowl. As Grant states, that is why I refer to experiencers as players in the Super Bowl. They are in the biggest game ever played, and whether they are quarterback or water boy, they are in the stadium and they've got to play in the biggest game that will ever take place. And Grant's also been receiving information, and I wanted to include that as well for you. Okay, and Jim continues, it was early 2012 when I started getting tremendous anxiety that I'm supposed to do something. It did not let up when I joined CIRO. My first event was the Grant Cameron event. And he's talking about CIRO International, where we bring in speakers. Grant was one of our speakers a few years ago. I floundered around looking for what I was supposed to do. It wasn't until I started working on the civil rights angle that things started falling into place. Disclosure is the companion issue that I am most interested in as part of my urgency. The two go hand in hand. Okay, so let me see. He says, okay, I want to read what else Jim said. I was feeling that I was on the right track in meeting people I am supposed to meet. Meeting Stephen Bassett, most of you know who he is, he's working hard towards disclosure, put me in the best of moods that my goals were falling into place. I talked about disclosure strategies for an hour with him. After the election, my angst has accelerated. It could be related to Trump's election. However, last night I was reading an interview with C.D.B. Bryant, author of Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, Alien Abductions, UFOs, and the Conference at MIT. He talked about receiving messages that if the planet heats up 2 degrees, that the global warming effects will become irreversible. Mankind is unlikely to survive according to him. He got messages from ET. This morning, the first thing I saw was that Trump is going to appoint a climate change denier to head the EPA. Global warming is my number one reason for wanting disclosure, and as Stephen Bassett puts it, disclosure is the sword that will cut the Gordian knot and make the world think of ourselves as being from Earth and not our country. I think my urgency is about more than electing a sexual predator. Again, harsh words, but this is where the information that we feel everyone needs to know. Okay, so we've got some preliminary conclusions. The need to do something has been around since the abduction phenomenon was discovered. However, it has not consumed so many people's thoughts and motivations. In the last 5 years, my clients and many other experiencers are all coming forward with the same urgent feelings. They are to do something, but they do not know what it is. It has rapidly accelerated both the numbers coming forward and the intensity of their feelings. The Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, FREE, F-R-E-E, conducted a survey in 2016. The survey was based on conscious recollections. The survey validates these preliminary conclusions. In the survey of nearly 2,000 experiencers, most have these general feelings of a need to act. 39% were given an environmental message. 34% were told about future natural catastrophes. 53% were shown a vision, a video, or picture. 25% were told their mission on Earth. Okay, and another, as I wanted to put these in here to show that these are the the pictures, the visions that experiencers have been given all through the years. These were taken from my cases in the 90s, and in the fact that these feelings are now accelerating the last 4 or 5 years. This could be any city, anywhere in the United States, flooding. Okay. Methods of ET message conveyance. In his book, Walking Among Us, David Jacobs was here last year, I believe. David Jacobs states that neural control, he previously called it mind scan, is central to the abduction phenomenon. The close gaze of the doctor likely allows the passage of thoughts directly into the subconscious mind of the experiencer through the neural connections between the eye and the brain. The thoughts transmitted through neural engagement are rarely remembered by the experiencer. Other times, the experiencer is shown realistic videos of future events and told that this is our future if we do not change. Some have even been part of presentations where groups of experiencers are shown images or receive messages they cannot readily remember. These methods of thought transfer are common, but their purpose is almost never explained to the experiencers by the aliens. Possible explanations. Last October, David Jacobs was also one of Zero International's speakers, and he spoke on the changes in the alien agenda. He sees a real change in the direction of the hybrid program. He states it is ending and the late-stage hybrids are beginning to live among us. He sees this as ominous and that abductees are often unconsciously helping them assimilate. Under David's hypotheses, the recent urgency could relate to the alien hybrid program changes and new roles for abductees. And then here's some artwork of the mind scan, somebody on a table and the alien being staring very closely to the experiencer. And again, this happens quite frequently when the experiencers are on board. Okay. Some more possible explanations. We have my colleague and friend Barbara Lamb and Mary Rodwell from Australia. She was also one of our speakers along with David Jacobs last year. Mary Rodwell and Barbara Lamb and the free survey findings of most experiencers that participated each believe they are here to help us. Upgrades, hybrids, new humans, indigo children, and other positive efforts are being made to help us survive and ascend. They see the alien program as benevolent in helping us reach a higher level of existence and prevent destruction of the planet. Mary Rodwell, in her book, The New Humans, and as I mentioned before, she was one of our speakers last October. Her latest book, The New Humans, details how children are born that exhibit extraordinary abilities and claim to work with aliens. They claim to have been upgraded and are here to advance the human race. Quite startling information that she's been receiving from 4 to 12-year-olds. Their parents profess amazement at the intellectual abilities and are baffled by their explanations of the source of their knowledge. These upgrades are needed to help the planet and the human race avoid catastrophe. Mary and Barbara sees Earth changes approaching during the lifetimes of these children. Either they succeed or the human race does not progress. Another example, Suzanne Hansen, experiencer. She just wrote a book. She's from New Zealand, The Dual Soul Connection, which I have not had a chance to read yet. Yes, she says, as both a longtime researcher and an experiencer, I'm aware of a massive preparatory stage taking place with ETs and humans. I have actually been speaking about this in lectures since 2007, when I had certain experiences leading me to believe things were ramping up. And this became even more evident in 2010 to 2012. Much of this info is not in my book, as there was just not enough space, and so I had to select events that illustrated the whole picture. For those of us who are old enough to remember the Buffalo Springfield song, there's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. I won't sing it to spare you. But this recent trend has great meaning and shows a change in the program and our purpose behind abductee experiencer alien interactions. The changes may not apply to all abductions or to all alien groups that are interacting with us. However, it shows that there is more to this phenomenon than just a hybrid breeding program. The people who appear to have insight into the intentions believe that there are events unfolding that will include direct participation by experiencers. These upgrades are needed to help the planet and the human race avoid catastrophe. Earth changes are approaching during the lifetimes of these children. Either they succeed or the human race does not progress. Like other theories of experiencers and researchers, experiencers are to play a central role in the coming changes. Regardless of who is right, we are wrong to ignore the messages from experiencers. They are the ones who interact directly with aliens. Regardless of alien motives, the science is as clear as science ever gets. We are witnessing planetary changes on a daily basis. Many experiencers state they have viewed the home planet of the Greys, and it is barren, desolate place. On our current path, we are likely to share the same fate. The pace of the political change, the intensifying weather patterns, and the degree to which power continues to be consolidated in the hands of the privileged few lend credence to the warning calls of experiencers. One of the main reasons that the voices of experiencers are largely silent is the way our government has treated them. Since the coming of the flying saucers, official government policy has been to marginalize the voices of witnesses, experiencers. One of CERO's missions is to give a voice to experiencers and support their unique perspective. We have to pay attention to what these people are saying. No longer can we allow experiencers to be silenced. From what I have heard in working directly with experiencers for the last 25 years, I am convinced that disclosure will not happen through our government, but from the masses of people who will start coming forward. All of you, people from all walks of life. And now I'd like to bring up CERO member and attorney Jim Lowe, and he's going to talk about experiencers' civil rights. Jim?
Thanks, Yvonne. I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't have enough room here. Good morning. Can you hear me? Little louder. Is that better? Okay, now I have to escape,
Okay,
close this down.
and then minimize, yeah.
Boy, asking a lawyer to do this is probably dangerous.
Where do you minimize?
There we go. Okay,
Thank you, Alejandro.
and there we are. And there we are.
Alejandro saves the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, again, good morning. My name is Jim Lowe, and it's an interesting journey for me because I'm just a regular lawyer, and up until I'd had experiences up till about 2012. I just put them in a corner and didn't pay attention to them. I'd occasionally go to a UFO conference, sit in the back where no one could see me, and run off. And then 2012, I just kept getting the same kind of need to do something kind of thing, and I met with Yvonne, and she told me, "Oh, I've been hearing that." And I go, "Oh, yeah." And so I went back and I Google searched her, and sure enough, she'd been interviewed on these issues back in 2011. And so, from my perspective, I saw pretty much a family when I joined CERO. And the experience or sessions here are the same way. But I'm not here to talk about my particular experience. I'm here to talk about civil rights issues and experiencers. I'm going to start at the beginning of what I feel is the civil side, not the military side, of the beginning of debunking and, I believe, surveillance of experiencers and certain types of investigators who have found unique evidence. I'm trying to make it forward. I got to point at the thing, I guess. What?
Move it forward.
Okay. Oh, I'm raising the sound. I'm not. Let me talk a little bit about myself. I'm a 37-year California lawyer, and I represent local governments mostly. I specialize in municipal law, election law, and civil rights. I handle a significant number over the years of First Amendment cases, either representing the government or representing private individuals. I've been to the California Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in First Amendment type issues. Now, I'm also, like you've heard, I'm an experiencer probably for 55 years. And I wonder if I'll have any clients left after this presentation. I only have 3 more appellate cases to go till I retire, so hopefully I can make it that far. So keep the cameras out of the room. Now, I figured out how to do it. My basketball coach in high school said I couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time, so I have to do multiple things, so I may have to slow down. Now, what I'm going to talk about is the First Amendment, and I'll just give you a little primer. I'm sure you all know this, but the free speech section of the First Amendment has 3 different provisions. The one we all know, no law abridging freedom of speech, but also we have the right to peaceably assemble, as we're doing here today. And finally, we have the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. In other words, to right a wrong. And I think that's the part that's gone tragically wrong. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about something called prior restraints. And that's where the government spends time and effort to prevent people from speaking before they talk. It's either to limit discussion or to eliminate it completely. There are several types of prior restraints. I'm going to focus on viewpoint-based regulations. They're not allowed as a government policy or custom. The government cannot regulate speech because of the message the speech conveys. Now, when it comes to ET presence, subject or content-based regulations, we can talk all we want. And right now, most people see it that aren't into it like we are as entertainment more than a public policy issue or something for political discussion. But when it comes to viewpoint regulation, the government cannot regulate based on the message, and I feel that sometimes, not always, but sometimes ET presence viewpoints are restricted. They want to keep them out of the mainstream, and they want to keep them out of the political discussion. As long as we're on the sidelines, they're happy. But if we go beyond that, then there are restraints put in place that I'll talk about later. Now let me talk about a few basics in First Amendment law. First of all, speech cannot be restricted on what might happen. Future hypothetical harm is not something that the government can look at and restrict your speech rights over. A second basic standard is the protection of diverse or unpopular ideas. If belief in an ET presence is a fringe idea, under the First Amendment and U.S. Supreme Court cases, it deserves more protection, not less. Finally, traditional restrictions on standing, that is the ability to bring an action in court, are supposed to be relaxed if expressive conduct is subject to a prior restraint. Now, let me go back to 1952 because I believe that's where all this started. There were reports on the military side, but the civilian side started in 52. 52 was an interesting year, besides the fact that's the year I was born, which I believe, according to the press reports I've read. There were 16,000 newspaper articles estimated that year on UFOs and flying saucer issues. In July of 52, there was a UFO wave over Washington, D.C. with radar sightings, with visual confirmations, according to both the Washington Post and the New York Times, a fact which they both conveniently forgot today. In December of that year, the Robertson panel was formed by the Truman administration. It was intended to give a classified report to the intelligence community and the executive branch on the potential threat for flying saucers. According to many reports and some of the former members talking, it was mostly to calm people in government about the threat. All but one panelist were military scientists who worked on closed programs. Now, the panel didn't actually start its work until January of 53, right before a transition between the Truman administration and the Eisenhower administration. They spent 4 days with 2 sessions a day, morning and afternoon, and they came to the conclusion that flying saucers show no indication that they constitute a direct physical threat to national security. And also there's no evidence that current 1953 scientific concepts needed to be changed. But, and that's why I'm here, they found that continued emphasis on reporting flying saucers is and I quote, a threat to the orderly functioning of the protective organs of the body politic. That's a pretty fancy way of saying it was a threat to those in power. Now, they also came up with a belief that UFO interest led to a morbid psychology and induced hysterical behavior, and more important, harmful distrust of duly constituted authority. In other words, the people in charge. National security agencies were recommended to take immediate steps to strip the UFOs and flying saucers of their special status. This is where the word debunking comes from, and that's where debunking started. There was a recommendation by J. Allen Hynek, who was a junior advisor to the panel, that training of astronomers be done. But that was never done. Only the debunking part of the education program was ever put in place. Now, the panel looked at 2 groups, neither of which are in existence today: the Civilian Flying Saucer Investigators of Los Angeles and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, then of Wisconsin, later of Arizona. And it was believed that, and I'm going to quote, such organizations should be watched because of their potentially great influence on mass thinking if widespread sightings should occur. Think about that. Should be watched if widespread sightings should occur not because of any threat from the UFOs, but because of the ability of people who are interested in UFOs of changing mainstream thought. The recommendations basically established a federal policy of viewpoint discrimination targeted at nonviolent civilian groups. Neither one of these groups had any communist influence or any threat to the military or anything. They were just peaceable groups like this group here. And yet they were targeted and called out in a CIA report that was distributed throughout government. They are to be watched because of what they advocate. Now, the time period in question shows that it was a period of illegal activity throughout government. The 50s had the McCarthy era with witch hunts for communists in the entertainment industry and in government. In 1953, Allen Dulles, brother of Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, moved up to head the CIA under the new Eisenhower administration. Under Dulles's watch, the CIA engaged in a series of illegal activities. MK-Ultra mind control experiments on innocent US citizens. They helped overthrow the duly elected governments of Iran and Guatemala in 1954. And Dulles's reign ended with the Bay of Pigs operation in 1961. So looking at the illegalities recommended by the Robertson panel and think they wouldn't be implemented, everything else was during that time period. And so it just fits hand in hand with what was going on besides this, outside of the UFO field. In addition, during this time period, there was a melding of US corporate interest and the national interest. Interventionist policies of US corporations, many of whom were clients of the Dulles Brothers law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell in New York. An example is United Fruit, which was the largest corporation in Guatemala and was having problems with the government, rather than the communist threat. There was little oversight during this time by Congress because anything that was spun with helping us against the communist threat was given carte blanche. Basically, these kinds of issues, in addition to the military growth and the other issues that many people have talked about, were the beginnings of the military-industrial complex. Now, whenever I talk about viewpoint discrimination, there are two groups that are really subject to this that I feel are affected by it. One, members of the public like yourselves, but we're usually confined to small groups or we deal with a small segment of society. Whenever government looks at us in general, it has the help of the media, traditional science, skeptics, and self-regulation by speakers themselves, including people like me. So they really don't need to do much effort. UFO issues are looked on as entertainment by the general public, and as long as it doesn't escape that little niche, everything's fine. There's a second group. Experiencers, special witnesses, and investigators. I fall into this group. Not all investigators, not all experiencers, not all witnesses, but people that have unique evidence or unique experiences that could possibly change the government's narrative or attack the government's narrative. And I call these people breakout persons, and those are subject to surveillance and other means to try to keep them in place. Think about Roswell. It's the 70th anniversary. Think of the efforts the government went to in 1947 to keep that quiet. And then think about after Major Jesse Marcel met with Stanton Friedman, who should be standing here right now, but I guess he's stuck in a snowstorm. But think about the effort the government went through in the 90s with two reports. They spent millions of dollars to try to cover that up and to divert attention from the real issues that occurred in Roswell in 1947. That's part of the viewpoint discrimination I'm talking about. Now, there are lots of different ways the government can do this, and you all know most of them. Hoaxes, misinformation. Think about the flares that were dropped in the wake of the Phoenix lights to try to throw people off. And for the average news person that doesn't know anything about UFOs, oh, it must have been flares. I'll go on to something else. Lately, NPR, National Public Radio, read a press release from the CIA that claimed that in the 1950s, flying saucer reports were actually U-2 spy planes. They read it without comment and went on to the next item. Material evidence is stolen. There was an episode of MUFON Hangar 1 where a car's side panel was irradiated by a UFO. They took it to an independent lab. When they went back for the results, they were told that men in suits showed up and took it that said they were from MUFON. That's just one example. The most common example of generalized discrimination or attempts by the government to cover this up are records destroyed or hidden. There are many examples. You've heard them if you've come to this program often. Later in the program, Colonel Charles Halt will be here, and we'll talk about radar tapes being removed by U.S. agents from the UK without their permission in the wake of the Rendlesham Forest incident. Also, denial of government involvement. One particularly egregious situation was in the 1980s, there was a fleet of military helicopters escorting a triangular object that was leaking plutonium over a Texas highway. It irradiated a car underneath, had multiple witnesses, including a police officer, and a lawsuit was filed. The case was later dismissed because no agency would claim that they owned the helicopters. So what agency is going to step forward in court and say, oh yeah, that was our helicopters escorting that triangular UFO object leaking plutonium? The Cash Landrum federal tort litigation. Now, witnesses are visited by government agents, but most of the surveillance now is cyber surveillance. They know your metadata. They, in fact, under the Obama administration, we learned that every phone call in the United States, the metadata is kept in a big room. So they have the ability to do it, and the question is whether they're still doing it or not. Now, Robertson established a policy of surveillance of nonviolent groups that I believe is still around. Now, using some of the examples I've discussed, I think many experiencers have good grounds for believing they're still having some sort of contact. Now, what can they do about it? And this is where lawyers usually tell you, I can represent you and here's my card. Well, I'm here to tell you there isn't anything we can do. Under current law, the seminal surveillance case is Laird versus Tatum. It's a 1972 Supreme Court decision, and it arose out of the Army intelligence illegally doing surveillance on Vietnam War protesters in Detroit. The court found that there was an official policy of surveillance by the Army, that there was no imminent threat of civil disturbance, that the potential targets of the surveillance were not in contact with any persons who meant to do the country harm. But there was an inability of the plaintiffs to actually do discovery, which is a normal process in lawsuits, because of the State Secrets Act. In other words, they couldn't even review it. A lot of times nowadays with intelligence information, you're allowed to go what is called in camera. And I do it with police files, personnel files, where you go in front of the judge, the government goes in front of the judge, shows them the information, and the judge decides whether it can be released or not. That wasn't even allowed in this case. Now, the decision was a 5-4 decision. And the people who bring these cases have to know they're a target before they can even bring the suit. They have to know that there's a program, and they have to know that they personally are a specific target of the program. The dissent talked about the Army's surveillance, calling it massive and comprehensive, and that they used infiltrating agents at meetings, and they shadowed public figures, yet there was no ability to have any relief on that. Justice William Rehnquist was part of the panel. He was a new justice in the court. He had helped approve the program while he was in the Nixon Justice Department, but refused to disqualify himself. He was a swing vote. Now, this case is still law today after Clapper versus Amnesty International USA in 2013 Supreme Court case, another 5-4 vote. After Laird and the Clapper case, mere chilling of speech is not sufficient to bring an action. You have to have the specific information, as I said. Now compare this to normal non-surveillance cases where the government chills or attempts prior restraints of your speech. In those cases, as I said earlier, you have an easier chance to get into court. That standing, which is a very difficult issue, in other words, the ability to stand in court under federal law, because everyone would be suing the president if anyone could have standing, is relaxed whenever there's a prior restraint under the First Amendment. Now, the Robertson panel's domestic surveillance policy, I believe, is still in effect. And if it is, the targets would have no recourse in federal courts. Courts don't allow you to go there and discover whether there's a program in place and that you're a part of it. Now, there are many legal problems that experiencers face. Job loss, child custody issues, and just the ability to find out what's going on through record searches of government records. I believe it is monitoring your emails, restricting documents that you seek from the government, and possible surveillance of events you attend. I believe the First Amendment is supposed to protect our speech and expressive conduct, no matter how unpopular or contrary the view is. UFOs are not a threat, but everyone in this audience is, unfortunately. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm finished with 1 minute.
Thank you all.